Greetings. I'm Brother Bryant from the Congregation of Israel, the Biblical School of Global Liberation for All Oppressed Peoples. I am one of many representatives of the NMP, or the Nazarene Messianic Party, and I would like to welcome you all back to another installment of our Thursday night book reading and dialogue, where we've been examining the book titled Pedagogy of the Oppressed by author Paulo Freire. And this is I'm not sure how many weeks it's been. I know we're up to like class 10, according to the YouTube channel. So this would make class 11. Well, it's class. It's a long story about the videos, but it's this will be class 11 that we're on, and so much information has been brought out. We've had 3 readers so far, including myself, comrade brother RJ, and comrade elder sister Kaya. And over the last couple of readings, we've been hearing a lot of different new terminology. We've been seeing a lot of different ways to approach or to attack the issues within the society, the current society in which we live. And the same thing goes for the rest of this chapter that we're reading in chapter 2, the rest of the pages, the same thing goes is that we're going to see more and more examples of the issues or the contradictions that the oppressed or the working class, the proletariat that we face, and that we're called to transform or we're called to change after something happens within our consciousness, which is this transformation, or which is this we would call in the Bible this repentance, right? And we also at the school we look at repentance as revolutionary. But when this revolution takes place in our mind, right, in our epistemology, if you will, then we can go outside and we can start to transform society. And when I mean by that is we can go outside and start to deal with others who they lay hold, or they not lay hold, excuse me, but they have this mark, if you will. They have this mark of the oppressors, or this mark of the old society, or this mark of the old way of doing things. So once when we as individuals, we reflect and we start to examine ourselves, we can start to, go outside and, process the situation and therefore begin to change others. But before I get started with a little brief recap, I got the same format. I'm going to read a psalm this evening, and we're going to read Psalms 57. Psalms 57 out of the King James Version of the Bible. This is a short psalm, not a long psalm, 11 verses in it, but Psalms 57. And it reads, "Be merciful unto me, O God. Be merciful unto me, for my soul trusteth in thee. Yea, in the shadow of thy wings will I make my refuge until these calamities be overpassed." One second, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm letting someone in the room because I'm seeing bros are waiting. I'm sorry, excuse me for chopping up the scripture. Oh, no, they're in. Somebody letting them in. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, let me start it over. Be merciful unto me, O God. Be merciful unto me, for my soul trusteth in thee. Yea, in the shadow of thy wings will I make my refuge until these calamities be overpassed. I will cry unto God most high, unto God that performeth all things for me. He shall send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. Selah. God shall send forth his mercy and his truth. My soul is among lions, and I lie even among them that are set on fire, even the sons of men, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth. They have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have digged a pit before me, into the midst whereof they are fallen themselves. Selah. My heart is fixed, O God. My heart is fixed. I will sing and give praise. Awake up, my glory. Awake, psaltery and harp. I myself will awake early. I will praise thee, O Lord, among the people. I will sing unto thee among the nations. For thy mercy is great unto the heavens, and thy truth unto the clouds. Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth. And that was Psalms 57. Psalm 57 out of the King James Version of the Bible. So, going to climb right into this recap, just a brief recap, because we're going to take our time and we're going to chew on these 2 pages this evening. God willing, we'll have some great, good dialogue. Last week, a lot of things were brought out, and we had some real healthy dialogue. And I mean, I was so happy after listening to it all this week, last Thursday's meeting, because I mean, almost everybody put their 2 cents into the conversation, which is good because Mr. Freire, this is what he encourages, especially when it comes to this student and teacher relationship, about communicating and dialogue, right? And even when he talks about the liberation of the oppressed and the oppressor, this only happens when we start the dialogue and when we start to engage with one another, right? But we last week when we was looking at this, we had a couple of good conversations, but I kind of like took a lot from what Elder Sister Kaya had presented to us, because it was so great. You know, I had the copy. I wasn't always a copier, you know, a cheater in school, but I had to copy a lot of what she said. I didn't copy too much, and you know, plagiarize too much, but I took some of the things she mentioned from her notes because they stood out to me, and they caused me to think about some things and consider some things because they really weighed heavy on me. But I'll get to that in a minute. I just wanted to look at the beginning of chapter 2. And the first paragraph, it reads, in my book, is pages, hold on a second. I know we had the page thing messed up. We'll get it together before we start the reading. But on my book, chapter 2 starts off on pages 44. And before we start reading again, we'll get the pages together, exactly which page is which. But I just wanted to get a little bit of the first paragraph. And I'm going to be real quick, y'all. I'm not going to hold up the whole night with a recap. I'll be real quick. But it says, a careful analysis of the teacher-student relationship at any level, inside or outside the school, reveals its fundamentally narrative character. This relationship involves a narrating subject, the teacher and patient, listening objects, the students. The contents, whether values or empirical dimensions of reality, tend in the process of being narrated to become lifeless and petrified. This is the part. Education is suffering from narration sickness. And I like what he said, because Elder Kaya had mentioned a little bit of that last week about how she doesn't believe that this teacher-student relationship is only governed or only exclusive to the classroom. And he says the same thing. He says a careful analysis of the teacher-student relationship at any level, inside or outside of the school, right? And then he said education is suffering from a narration sickness. And we see why, because it's on pages 32. He kind of like mentions that thought before we got there. On page 32, he mentions, I don't think I highlighted it. Oh, darn. He mentions it on pages 32. Give me 1 second, y'all. Bear with me. He speaks about it. Okay, yeah. There it goes. He says, I started right here. It says analysis of existential situations of oppression reveals that their inception lay in an act of violence initiated by those with power. This violence as a process is perpetuated from generation to generation of oppressors who become its heirs and are shaped in its climate. This climate creates in the oppressor a strongly possessive consciousness, possessive of the world and of men and women. Apart from direct concrete material possession of the world and of people, the oppressor's consciousness could not understand itself, could not even exist. Fromm said of this consciousness that without such possession, it would lose contact with the world. The oppressor's consciousness tends to transform everything surrounding it into an object of its domination. The earth, property, and production, he goes on to say. But I brought that up is because we see it in the beginning of chapter 2. Mr. Freire, he mentions again objects. He said this relationship involves a narrating subject. That's the teacher or the oppressor, right? The impatient listening objects. And Mr. Freer also, the reason I brought it up is because that's tend to be the in other words, the psychology of the oppressed, that we're objects. Even with the oppressor views us as objects. We're not good for thinking. We don't have our own thoughts. We went through a lot of this last week and the week before, how they don't see us as being capable or having the ability to think for ourselves, or even having the what's it called, the wherewithal to even be dependent or independent. Excuse me. They don't think that we have that. So they look at us as objects. And we also read in chapter 1 how Mr. Freer mentions the necrophilic deal, whereas though they look at us like lifeless. And because we become submissive, or we become so passive to their exploitation and their violence, we start to take on that way of thinking, that we can't do anything without our oppressors, without the teacher telling us we don't have any ideals, or we don't have any knowledge, or we don't have any intelligence. If we don't get it from something or somewhere or somebody, in a position, right, some type of hierarchy, then we're no good, we're useless. And he mentions more of this on pages 42. I want to get that real quick. He says, because he talks about the subjects, or the oppressed, right? He says, he's talking about this press. Listen, he says they cannot enter the struggle as objects in order later to become human beings, right? The struggle begins with men's recognition that they have been destroyed, right? So we have to start to understand that in order for us to transform our reality, or the way that we're living now, we cannot be just students or these objects, right? We can't enter into our revolution that way. That's not how it goes. We have to enter into our revolution, or we have to enter into this repenting, if you will, like the Bible says, when we start to recognize or self-reflect on what's happened, on our contribution or our participation in what's happening. We have to start looking at it from that position. If we keep looking at it as like we're objects, we can't do nothing, then we'll never do anything. If we keep looking at it like we have to wait for somebody to tell us, when to go, we have to get the thumbs up, or we have to get the sign of approval before we move forward, or before we make praxis, if you will, then we won't do anything. But when we start to reflect, and when we start to consider why are things the way they are, and then we start to fill in the blanks and realize that our participation or our non-participation is the direct cause of our reality of what we see, then we'll start to get real life results. But as long as we have this ideology, if you will, that we have to wait to be told when to go and when not to go by some kind of man or some kind of leader or teacher, whatever, if we keep going along with that kind of narrative, then we never going to do anything, because Mr. Freer, he's going to go on in chapter 2 to explain to us how, well, he says it. Let me get that real quick. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. He says it really quick. Let me get that. He says, indeed, the interests of the oppressors lie in changing the consciousness of the oppressed. This is page 47 in my book. He says, not the situation which oppresses them. So if we start to see, let's say hypothetically speaking, people are seeing right now what's going on. We see all the bad that's going on, all the situations, all the whatever, right? The plundering, right? But if we are waiting for the oppressors or the leaders that only want to establish and continue to keep their rule going in this society, if we wait for them for the answers, we'll never get no answers. If we just wait for them to teach us, to educate us on how can we make clean drinking water, how can we make clean energy, if we keep waiting for their version of, if you will, salvation, if we keep waiting on them, these oppressors, then we'll never get what we truly want. So what we must do is we must go through the process that Mr. Freire is telling us to go through this self-reflection, right? Through these dialogues, through communicating with one another, through this, if the teacher is desired to really be comrades of the oppressed, or the oppressors really desire to be comrades of the oppressed, right? If they really desire that, then once when we come to that agreement, then we can really have a revolution. But if we just going to sit here in these classrooms and, okay, I'm going to get this job, and, I'm going to change the world someday because I'm going to add this to the world. No, that's never going to work, because the oppressors, they don't have no incentive to change this exploitive narrative. They have that's not what's going to happen. They want to stay in power. They desire to rule, right? So it's up to the oppressed to educate and liberate themselves. He mentions this in chapter 1, that it's up to us to go through this whole a state of repenting, if you will, right? I'm using the Bible's terminology. He mentions self-reflection and he mentions practice, but it's up to us to go through these changes. It's up to us to consider our reality, and from us considering our reality, then we can have some kind of revolution, right? Within ourselves. We teach others, then we'll see it in our community, and then it is spread forth, so forth and so on. It is spread out, right? But this only happens through us, not the leaders who have established and are continuing to concrete and cement this reality. They'll never give it to us. So it's up to us, okay? So moving along in this recap, just real quick, because I don't want to hold up too much time. I just wanted to bring out the fact that when we starting to see this teacher-student relationship, we see that he's telling us to dialogue. We mentioned this last week, and he's telling us to communicate. We mentioned this last week. And Sister Kaya, she had mentioned, I'm gonna get one of her quotes real quick. She had mentioned to honor the existence of knowledge in another human being is to not only honor that individual, but to honor the world as they know it or as we know it. She also said, Elder Kaya, she said, this student-teacher relationship isn't exclusive to a school building. I'm paraphrasing, but it says, but it's who we become. It's the foundation of this community we're called to establish or manifest. So the reason why I brought it out is because when we look at teachers, I know Mr. Freire is using the word teacher in chapter 2, but teacher can also be interchangeable with a leader, right? And we see that the leaders today, or the teachers of today in this society, in this hierarchical society, we see that the teachers or the leaders, they have an oppressive nature to them. They wish to turn us into inanimate objects, right? So as we're witnessing this, we know that these particular teachers or these particular leaders, they do not have the answer, because they don't wish to change the condition which oppresses us. They just wish, like he just mentioned, they only wish to change our consciousness, which makes us passive and docile and submissive to the oppression. So in other words, they give us stuff like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or you got to work hard, or they give us all these different, or like the false generosity that Mr. Freire mentions. They give us all these different ideals, but none of these ideals are ever telling us to know. Let's think about, how do we change the dynamics of differentiating wealth, right? How do we change the dynamic of exploitation? How do we change that? Not how do we put band-aids on it and make it better, but see, that's not their goal. That's not their mission. They don't want to change that because they benefit from it. He even mentions in chapter 1 how the oppressor feels as if we take away them listening to Beethoven, and we take away them going to trips and stuff like that, how they themselves start to feel like they're being oppressed because they, for so long, they've been oppressors. They've been, plundering us. If we start to take away all that stuff and make everything equal, they'll feel as though that now they're being oppressed. He mentions that. So we see that this oppressed if contradiction, not a contradiction, but this, let me say, this dynamic, this back and forth. We see how it's a psychological deal, and we see how that it takes the people who are oppressed to change it, because the oppressor cannot understand that what he's doing, not that it's wrong, but he can't understand that what he is doing is actually the causation of all the destruction we see on the planet. They don't see it like that. And Mr. Freire mentions that because they don't look at us as animated. They look at us as objects. So because they take on this type of psychology, it doesn't even matter anymore to them who their society, not their society, but the way they function. It doesn't matter who it affects or what it destroys, because their whole thing is gain. Their whole thing is profit, how to make more and accumulate more money. So they really don't, they really don't care at the end of the day, right? Now, whether it's deliberate or not, I can't say. But I know that when you're dealing with that psychology where they're only been, a lot of them have been raised in privileged homes, these oppressors. They come from generations and generations of wealth, having money, having whatever, so and so resources. So all they know is this way, how to dominate, how to exploit. So it comes to a point now that it becomes natural to them. Like some of us, for instance, it becomes natural to us to just go to work and, don't say nothing. And, we're just going to save our, our checks up and we're going to finally get ahead. It becomes natural. A lot of times when we aren't educating ourselves on what is to be done, we kind of go into the mode of things that, oh, this is the way it is. And this is, how God has it. Mr. Fred mentions that how, some of us think that that God is the orchestrator of this dysfunctional society. Because why? We have been so long submissive and docile, and the oppressors has been using a banking education on us, whereas though they have deposited in us that this is how it's done. You go to school, you get your GED, you get your diploma, whatever. You either go to college, you get a trade. They have deposited this in us. So we start to think that this is just the normal order of life. We never kind of consider that, oh, maybe we can change this. And sometimes when we have that conversation of we can change this, you have that one individual, group of individuals, well, we can't change it. And we know that that's not true, because we have seen in times past examples of when people have done something. And then I know the elders always ask at the school, well, how do you know we can't change it? And that's a different conversation. But what I mentioned that to say is that we see that it's something psychological with the oppressor and the oppressed, whereas though the oppressed doesn't really consider the oppressed and how they feel, because he looks at them as being inanimate, right? He looks at them as being dependent, right, on him or on her, whatever, whoever the oppressor is. And the oppressed, how they look at it is the same way, because they what they say, don't bite the hand that feeds you. We're getting everything from the oppressor. So whatever the oppressor is telling us, we look at the same way. We can't do nothing. We have to depend on them. We shouldn't be, in other words, we shouldn't be jealous of what the oppressor has. We should just work hard and get what we got too, and just we can be in a position. So it's kind of like this. It's kind of like this constant round and round we go. But no matter what, if we depend on those kind of people, or we depend on these individuals to change our reality, that will never happen. And that's what Mr. Freire is bringing out to us. And one more thing I wanted to bring out about the student-teacher relationship. He mentions on page 45, he says, for apart from inquiry, apart from the praxis, individuals cannot be truly human. Knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention. Through the restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, with the world, and with each other. Again, he's showing us. He's showing us that it's not going to happen from us just, us just getting information from our teachers or from our leaders. That's not how this deal is going to work. It's not going to happen from somebody just telling us something. And okay, you told it to me. Now it's inside of me, and I either regurgitate it or repeat it in the real world. And we do that now. The leaders or the teachers, they tell us stuff, and notice everything that they tell us, or they have told us, I know at least me, only thing we have done is strengthen capitalism, strengthen this society, because they have not taught us revolution. They have not taught us to think for self or critical analysis. They haven't taught us this in these institutions of education like college or whatever, GED programs, high school, grade school. They haven't taught us how to think for self. They haven't taught us to challenge reality. No, but they have taught us, for at least as long as I know the curriculum in school, they've taught us how to do, basic math, basic science, basic language arts and history and stuff like that. And all those things only shape you to go to college. When you go to college, it's not, in other words, the curriculum you get in college and high school is not telling you to overthrow the empire. It doesn't teach you that. So what you do when you come out of school, you go get a job and you fall in line. So we start to see that if you don't have this praxis or this revolution in which we're learning from Mr. Freire and other people that we have studied at the school, if you don't have this kind of knowledge, or you don't have these kind of leaders and these kind of teachers, then you won't produce anything. You know what I mean? You'll only have, slogans and stuff like that, one day, or you'll even use slogans from out the Bible. Jesus is going to come back and fix it one day. Or, I look to the hills from which come my help. You'll have all those kind of things, but you'll never challenge your reality. Why? Because there's no self-reflection. You don't see how that you're a part of your oppression. You don't see how you're, I mentioned this last week, how your non-participation is a part of your plundering, exploitation, and suffering. So when we start to go through this self-reflection, or when we start to go through this praxis, then we start to see, okay, I'm contributing to my own demise. It's me, right? And we mention that a lot of times in the different classes or discussions that we be having, is that a lot of people mention the devil and stuff like that. I mean, on the biblical side of things, people mention the devil and stuff like that. And I'm ready to turn it over to my sister. I want to read a little bit more, but real quick, we mentioned how people blame the devil for stuff, but a lot of times we see ourselves doing the devil's works, right? So we all stop doing the devil's works and we all stop exploiting each other, then we can change the narrative. But we never call into question on, why don't we stop doing the devil's work? Why don't we stop doing the wrong thing and do the right thing? Why don't we start doing justice and judgment? So it's the same thing what Mr. Freire is bringing out. When we talk about the oppressed, okay, yeah, we have been oppressed. We are going through something. With the capitalists, with the hierarchy, the aristocratic class, what they're doing, it is wrong. But what part do we play in it? As students, right? As students and desiring to be teachers, right? What part do we play in our demise? And when we start to have these dialogues with one another or communicate with one another, we start to see through self-reflection and through, I mean, not like he said, not communiques, not monologues, but through real communication and dialogue, we start to see that we play a part in this. We have given up all, right? I mean, our sweat, our blood, our tears in these factories and these jobs, whatever it is that we do for a living, we have given everything over to this so-called almighty dollar. And I mean, God forbid that we know that's not true, because they call it the almighty dollar. We know there's only one almighty, but we have given everything over to this ideology. So we start to see that although we are oppressed and although they do own the machines, they do own the resources, but are we contributing to that? When we think as students, when we start to have these dialogues, I listened to our dialogue last week on Thursday. I'm listening to all the knowledge that we're bringing out, right? And I'm listening to how brothers was bringing up the fact that they believe that we aren't capable of being independent. They believe that we're savages, we're barbarians. They believe all this kind of stuff the oppressor does, right? But do we agree with that through our non-participation? Are we agreeing with their sentiments? Well, I would say yes. If we're not doing anything, if we're not trying to practice, if we're not going through self-reflection, if we aren't really trying to be students where we're dialoguing with each other every day, not us, not because at the NMP we dialogue every day, all signal different other, but I'm talking about whoever wants to be a part of this, or whoever is complaining about the conditions that we're in. If we aren't participating, then all these things that the oppressor is saying about us and all these hoops and hurdles they're putting us through our non-participation, are we contributing to it? And see, that's where the self-reflection comes in, right? That's where the self-reflection comes in. We have to think about that. And if our answer is yes, that we're not participating, we're not doing anything, we aren't even daring to struggle, then we have fully been internalized or submerged in the ways of the oppressor. So now it is the oppressor's fault. I'm not saying it isn't, but now we have a role in it too. So as students, I think that Mr. Freire is telling us what we have to do. And Sister Kaya mentioned it last week. We have to look at everyone as having some form of knowledge. Everybody knows something, right? That right there blows hierarchy out the water. So it's not one group of people that have all the knowledge or all the answers to information. No, everyone has some kind of form of knowledge. And as we start to dialogue and communicate, right? Just as men and women, no hierarchy, no teacher student, right? Even though that we know that, okay, we get the concept of teacher student. We know that it, like I mentioned the week before, that it's our people that in certain subjects they know more than others. So it is that dynamic there. But once when we let go of the position of it, meaning that once when we don't look at ourselves as a teacher or a student, we look at ourselves as human beings, right? Trying to transform society. Once when we approach this situation, this narrative that we in like that, then we can start to see what world we can imagine. But for right now, if we just see ourselves as objects, inanimate, as long with the oppressor, that's how he sees us, right? Then we'll be non-participating, we'll be lackadaisical, we won't do that. And then our exploitation is partially our fault. So we have to be occupied and preoccupied with this revolution. So without further ado, I'm going to start going more into I think that's on my page it's 48, but I believe it's 75 in the anniversary edition that we're starting on this evening. And we're still talking about the teacher student back and forth. And again, the teacher student, remember, if you can, brothers and sisters, teacher can also be interchangeable. Somebody wants to, oh no, somebody coming in. Teacher can also be interchangeable with a leader, right? A leader or an oppressor. And student can also be interchangeable with an oppressed or a proletariat or the vulnerable, okay? Because remember, the teacher or the leader or the oppressors, they say in this society that they hold the knowledge. The leaders of this country, the leaders of this world, they have the knowledge, they have the educate, they have the scientists, they have the resources. So they lead the people. They are the educators. So that's how we got to look at this thing. That's why I was so grateful when Elder Sister Kaya mentioned that she doesn't think that this is only exclusive to a school building, this teacher and student dynamic. No, this goes into all facets of life. So when we look at, I'm sorry, I think somebody was speaking, but no, I think somebody. But when we look at this narrative, we start to see that we can apply this to everything, to just hierarchy. Okay, this teacher student thing. This is talking about hierarchy. It's talking about the oppressors. So as we go on tonight, this evening, I'm sure that we'll have questions and comments and we'll have dialogue. But I want to encourage more dialogue because last week I started to really see something that I didn't see before. I started to realize that the student and the teacher is everywhere. I know Sister Kaya had also brought out the book of Ephesians, how Paul was talking about the husband and wife or the marriage institution. And she had mentioned, she was reading out of a magazine, she had mentioned that she doesn't feel as though that Paul was just making his reference exclusively to husband and wife, but he was talking about the conditions that was going on in Ephesus. And she proved it when she brought out one of the what's his name, the philosophers, I think it was Aristotle, how he was talking about knowledge and different things of that nature. So we see that this knowledge is just not governed to teachers. It could be also in the hands of leaders or kings, right? Or mighty men, if you will. So when we start to look at this teacher student, just be a little bit open and look at it from that perspective too, as leaders or the people that lead, or the shepherds, if you will. Like the Bible uses the word shepherd. Yeah, look at that instance too. And we have to start really looking at where are the shepherds leading us to, and us the flock, right? Us the flock. I know Christ says, my sheep, they know me, they hear my voice. The voice that we're hearing from these leaders today, is it the voice of the Almighty, the Creator? Is it leading us into destruction and damnation, or into light and peace? And if it's not leading us into light and peace, then I'm arguing that the student or the oppressed, the proletariat or the flock, right, the sheep, I'm arguing that they should do something about it. They should have some self-reflection. They should go through a repentance stage, and then they should form a praxis, or they should form a real world, not a rebellion, but some kind of boycott, some kind of resistance. That's what should happen. Because if not, then we have really done what Mr. Freire is warning us about, internalizing the ways of the oppressor. And if we are getting this pedagogy, this education, we have to kind of overturn, or try to make a about face towards that kind of ending. Whereas though we have done anything about our condition, we have totally become inanimate objects, just like the oppressor has desired us to be. So without further ado, I'm going to get started on pages 48. I believe that's page 75 in the anniversary edition. I'm just going to read this first paragraph, and I'm going to turn it over to our reader this evening, Sister Kaya. Okay. So on pages 48 and in you guys' book, the anniversary edition, page 75, it reads, those who use the banking approach knowingly or unknowingly, for there are innumerable well-intentioned bank clerk teachers who do not realize that they are serving only to dehumanize, fail to perceive that the deposits themselves contain contradictions about reality. But sooner or later, these contradictions may lead formerly passive students to turn against their domestication and the attempt to domesticate reality. They may discover through existential experience that their present way of life is irreconcilable, with their vocation to become fully human. They may perceive through their relations with reality that reality is really a process undergoing constant transformation. If men and women are searchers and their ontological vocation is humanization, sooner or later they may perceive the contradiction in which banking education seeks to maintain them, and then engage themselves in the struggle for their liberation. And see, that's what I was mentioning earlier. Notice how he says that if he says they may perceive their relations with reality, that reality is really a process undergoing constant transformation. if men and women, these men and women are the oppressors who have converted and the oppressed, right? Both of them, because we know Mr. Freer mentions how some of the oppressed will convert. And when they do convert, they have to be fully in unison with the comrades. They can't come with their old way of, how they perceive themselves to be, whether they perceive themselves knowledgeable. They have to come humble and meek, right? He says, if men and women are searchers and their ontological vocation is humanization, right? They don't desire no more to have any titles. They don't desire them to practice lordship over each other anymore. They're looking for humanization, to be fully human, right? He says sooner or later, they may perceive the contradiction in which banking education, see, what's the contradiction of banking education? That I'm going to only tell you the things that I want you to know. That way I can get the the reality, the oppressor thing. I can get the desired reality that I want you to live in. See, I don't want you to look at reality as a process as we go along and change things, and as we go along and engage with different problems and contradictions within reality. Us being fully human, we change these different things in reality that exploit, or these different things in reality that destroy and kill. No, the oppressor wants us to go through reality with all the lessons and all the instructions that they have given us through the banking education platform. And that banking education platforms only gives us the desired reality that the oppressor wants. And that desired reality is to be docile, to be inanimate, right? To be dead almost, not dead like somebody in the morgue, but to be lifeless, to be robotic, if you will. That's the desired reality of the oppressors. The contradiction with that is that that's not really what the human being has to be. That's not really what the human being desires to be. But he doesn't know that, because why? He's been given banking education. He's been given just the information from these lords or these leaders that the oppressed wants us to have in order to get that desired reality. So the contradiction is that we don't have to live that way. But if we don't have this self-reflection, or we don't want to become fully human, then by default, we're basically doing it to ourselves. We're allowing it to happen. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the reader, elder sister comrade Kaya, and the floor is all yours, sister. You can pick up on this paragraph and add some more to it. You can continue to read it if you like.
Okay, thank you so much, Brother Brian. I mean, that was so good. Gosh, I mean, you said so much. I almost, you just said so much that made me think. And I couldn't really take notes fast enough. I was sitting here trying to take some notes and writing some stuff down, with some thoughts and stuff that kind of came to my head, because you just touched on so many things that that I was going to touch on. But I really, this is where I'm really glad about it, because like I told you, and we had talked about this, whenever anybody, you want to come in and read a paragraph or whatever, that's perfectly fine, because I got so much out of what you said. And I was just kind of, like I said, I was trying to take notes, because you said so many things that were really on point. And, and I feel like one of the things, before I kind of jump in, is you brought up the concept, or this ideology that we hold of this teacher-student relationship, and how that really just has to be broken down, because it's almost like that relationship is the precursor to how we look at society, to how we look at all these power structures. So it has to be destroyed, because if it's not destroyed, and we don't understand that, we are called to be teacher students and student teachers, and there's not this hierarchy going on, then we will always be conforming to this way that the oppressor is set up, to where we conform to this way of society, that our consciences are shaped by our conscience. This human conscience is shaped by society, and it really doesn't transform the conditions that actually oppress us. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting that you brought out is you talked about the how we blame the the oppressor for our circumstance, but we have a part in it. And it kind of came to me, actually, I think you might have said this. We rob ourselves of our humanity when we blame the oppressor for the complete situation that we're in, because it's almost like we have no ability to act apart from the oppressor. We don't really realize that's kind of dehumanizing ourselves in the reverse, or internalizing it, but it really is. When we say, okay, after we reflect, after we do this inquiry, after we come to these conclusions that we come to, if we don't understand that we have a part in this, that we have an active part in our oppression, then we are literally dehumanizing ourselves, and we're putting all the potential for humanity with the oppressor, as though we ourselves can't do anything at all. So this whole ideology that we have of this whole teacher-student relationship, it really has to be, blackballed, or however, I don't know how they say, but it just needs to be gotten rid of, because that's the only way that we're going to begin to change. We have to rethink the student-teacher relationship so that we can change or think again about how we see society and how we want society to be. And really, before I kind of jump in and start to share just some of my notes and stuff, and you can come in, or anybody can come in at any time you want. But before I do that, I just lost my thought. I lost my thought just that quick. Wow. Okay, well, I'm going to jump to something else because I just went blank. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start with just some of my notes. And you already read that first whole paragraph, Brother Brian, and that was kind of a long paragraph, but I'm just going to kind of share some of my notes. Now I remember what I was going to say. So tonight, really what I want to focus on, because like I brought out Ephesians last week, and I can't say that I'm going to be like heavily into the scripture or anything like that, but what came to me this week is this idea that mankind can stand apart from the world, and in his ability to stand apart from the world, even though he was created from it, he can stand apart from it. In this idea that he can stand apart from it, it really gives him the power, or empowers him with the capacity to intervene in it and to transform it. And so I'll develop that a little bit more later. But that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about when I get into the book of Romans, because I think a lot of what Freire is bringing out is this whole idea that as human beings, we are not, as he's going to talk about later on, we're not just like this this being that, this possessor of consciousness, but we are a conscious being. And because we are a conscious being, unlike the animals, which I'll talk about later, who don't have the capacity to stand apart from the world and assess it and make decisions. And that empowers them through praxis to intervene in it, to master over it, and to rule in it as the Most High intended mankind to do. Animals don't have that capacity, but we do. And that's exactly what I believe that, as I'm going to get into Romans, I believe that the apostle is bringing out when he says that we are not to be conformed to this world, but we're to stand apart from it and be transformed by the renewing of our minds. So I'm going to bring that out, but let me go ahead and start with just some of the notes I have based on the paragraph that you read, and then I'm going to jump into the other paragraph and briefly talk about that. So the banking concept of education, it instills in the student a way of knowing himself in the world, his place in the world, his place with the world and with others, and really how he's supposed to operate in relationship between fellow human beings, how he's supposed to work. And really it's imperative for us to understand that how this banking system works to instill how we see the world, how we see ourselves, because it is this method that is used by the oppressor to change, as I mentioned earlier, to change the consciousness of the oppressed and not change the conditions that oppress him. So it is this idea, it is how they feed into how we see the world that changes our consciousness. And we have to be aware that that is actually taking place, and even make other people aware of it. And because only then will we be empowered to stand apart from that, to fight against that, to intervene in our world, and then to transform it. The other note that I have here is, while there are many teachers with the best of intentions for educating their students, and you went over this because there are a lot of teachers who really want the best for their students, the banking concept of education renders the student as a possessor of a consciousness. And I'm going to get into this as I get into the last paragraph on this page, because Freire brings out the difference between being a possessor of a consciousness and being one that is actually a conscious being, one that has the ability to assess the world, to act in the world, to intervene in the world, to transform the world. Those are two very different things. So while, as I was saying, the banking concept of education renders the student as possessors of a consciousness instead of the necessary objective that should enable him to begin the process of becoming as he actually is. a conscious being in the struggle for the fullness of his humanity. That's what education should do. That's what it should be. But because it is narrated, because it is based on someone else's narration. And if you remember in the first, I think it was the Thursday before last, when I defined the word narration, one of the definitions of narration is a specific way of understanding. So education is taught to instill in us a specific way of understanding. And as that's instilled in us and people grow in that specific way of understanding, they never grow in the way that the Most High intended them to grow. We as human beings never grow in the way that the Most High intended us to grow. It was never supposed to be that way. As human beings, we're supposed to be able to observe our world, to learn from our world, to develop, to ask questions, to inquire, to mature, and to grow. And this is where knowledge comes from. But the whole banking concept of education, it negates that whole thing and actually prevents that from happening, so that we never really know our world. And it goes back to what Freire said, how it goes back to what the oppressors desire. They don't desire to have the truth revealed, nor to see it transformed. The other thing that I thought about in reading this first paragraph was it talked about here, and you read this, Brother Bryant, and I think I'm going to, and I'll just go back and read the whole thing because it's actually the second half, but I kind of want to lead into that. Those who use the banking approach, knowingly or unknowingly, for there are innumerable well-intentioned bank clerk teachers who do not realize they are serving only to dehumanize, fail to perceive that the deposits themselves contain contradictions about reality. But sooner or later, these contradictions may lead formerly passive students to turn against their domestication and the attempt to domesticate reality. They may discover through existential experience that their present way of life is irreconcilable with their vocation of becoming fully human. And I want to stop right there for a minute, because I think a lot of people, even with the struggle that we can have inside sometime, whether we're at work or whether we're at school, and we have these times and these moments where we have these contradictions that go on inside of us, and may not, and to some degree it could be on a subconscious level. And I'm going to give an example of what I mean. When I went to UC Davis, and I was taking, I can't even remember which class it was, but it was the first experience I had with Marx. And we read an excerpt, and I think Marx was talking about how human beings become like, they lose their humanity, it's stolen away from them, and they become like a part of the process of, or this means of production. And that was a lot of years ago. So I can't remember exactly what exactly was said, but I do remember that I felt a connection. Like I felt like this man is literally putting in a nutshell, kind of how I feel when I go to work, when I do this, when I do that, how disconnected I can feel. It doesn't really, it doesn't sync with my own humanity. And I didn't realize that that's what was going on. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that that's what's going on. That sometimes when you have these students, like it says here, they discover through existential experience that their present way of life is irreconcilable with their vocation of becoming fully human. They don't really know that that's what they're fighting for. They just know that whatever they're fighting for doesn't feel, that whatever they're pushing back against, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't fit with their life. It doesn't gel with reality for them. They just know that something has got to change, but they don't always know that they're actually fighting to be more fully human. And that was my experience. And so then it says here, they may perceive through their relations with reality that reality is really a process undergoing constant transformation. It is not this thing that they try to pass off on us as reality. It is dynamic, it is active, it is going through constant transformation. If men and women are searchers and their ontological vocation is humanization, sooner or later, they may perceive the contradiction in which banking education seeks to maintain them, and then engage themselves in the struggle for their liberation. So one of the notes I wrote here was, and I'm going to probably repeat this, instead of awakening in the student this idea of consciousness raising or conscientizao, I think it is, challenging and compelling the student to see in him or herself the power to know themselves, to know their world, and as a result to become transformers of it. the method itself contradicts their humanity by negating the process of knowledge through inquiry, invention, and reinvention. This process of reflection and asking questions and coming to know, and then, you know, based on what the conclusions you come to, you learn from that, and you grow more and you develop more. So it's this process of inquiry, of invention and reinvention. And what is actually sad and tragic is that, like I said earlier, there are a lot of teachers, so many of them who are well-meaning, and they really do care a lot about their students. And it's not just the teachers. Like, I believe it's pastors. I believe there are a lot of leaders who are very well-meaning, but they just don't understand this principle. And so the very thing that they're working for, there are contradictions in the very objective that they labor for. Yet in the course of their mission, as was stated in paragraph 1, there are those students who begin to ask questions, who begin to inquire, who through understanding their capacity for knowledge and reflection, begin to realize their present reality. That this domesticated version of reality that they feel like is being forced on them, and that it's not compatible with their actual way of being. And there's this conflict between what they're being told, or this idea of reality they've been given, and what they know in their heart to actually be true. Their way of living, their way of understanding the world, and is not really in alignment with their existential experience. So what the teacher is teaching is not in alignment with how they are actually experience reality, or their vocation to become more fully human. They may perceive through their relations with reality is a process in becoming, instead of this static, rigid, unchanging state of reality that has been presented to them. So it's almost like they come into this state of truth, where they understand reality for what it actually is, based on how they're understanding it, their experience of it, rather than what has been, what is actually being communicated to them by the teacher. They see this contradiction, they understand this contradiction, and they realize that what is being told them is very different from what they actually are experiencing. If men and women are searchers, if they yield to this process that is organic to the state of being human. So this whole process of acknowledging what is actually going on inside of us, our existential experience, how we experience the world, how we know the world, the questions we can ask, our observance, our search for understanding, all these things are organic to the state of being human. In fact, Freire talks about, like, if we go back here on it's my page 72, and on the other book, I think it's page 45. And it says here, for apart from the praxis, individuals cannot be truly human. Knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention, through the restless, impatient continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, with the world, and with each other. So this whole way of being is actually an organic state of human being. We all possess it. Every human being possesses it. Not everybody will always access it, and it will not always grow and flourish to the point where it's supposed to in human beings, but every human being possesses that. And so when we talk about these human beings, these men and women who are searchers and who yield to this process and this organic state of being human, then at that point, that's actually when they begin to push back on this process of domestication, this process that wants to adapt them, that wants to adapt the world to them and them to the world. And it's not in line with the reality of who they actually are. And that really is the goal and the process of the banking method of education. And I don't know if anybody has anything to say before I move on. Okay.
Yeah, I would like to say something. I would like to say, I think it's important to bring out the emphasis that he's making
Right.
on person's inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're not inquiring, he's using this word, knowledge emerges only.
Right.
Through the invention and reinvention,
mm-hmm.
through the restless,
right,
patient, continuing of hopeful inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important. And it's something else that we also looked at on page 75. He's saying the same thing, that even when he was talking about, again, when I understand him saying this banking education,
Mhm.
it's in the context of just presenting information without dialoguing on it per se to see whether it's authentic.
Right.
So he says here, teachers on page 75, they well intended, but they may give information that contain contradictions about reality itself.
Right.
So the teachers could have misinformation.
Right.
And so that must be revealed through feedback, if you will. But again, he's saying the responsibility. And I think this is constantly overlooked, because what if you're not searching?
Right.
Then you're really putting yourself in a position to be banked.
Right.
Okay, so if you're discussing something, or if you're not searching, you're not giving any feedback. You
Right.
don't have any. You don't want to.
Right.
So a lot of the emphasis, he's saying it subtly, but I think it's important even for those on the end of really being researchers. Because if you're not a researcher, if you're not really looking, then you just may say something in ignorance.
Right.
You're not, and so therefore, but again, if we don't look at it properly, okay, well, you're going to just say how I feel off the whim.
Right.
There's not much thought into it. Well, then that sort of establishes the argument for the banking education, because you're not searching.
Right.
And the things you're bringing to the table, maybe if you're not searching, it sometimes will boil down to be, with some to say, foolish, because of just the approach of those who not really, as he says here, if men and women are searchers,
Right.
their ontological vocation, and their ontological vocation is humanization.
Right.
So there's a lot of emphasis he's putting on the position of those who will be a teacher student. I think that's, for even people who's listening, it's important for people to have that. So it's not just you got something to say.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody have an opinion.
Right.
I was talking to some people today. Some people just talk just to talk.
Right.
So if you in that position and you are an educator, what it's difficult to carry on dialogue, wouldn't it be?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I'm just like that emphasis of that, where the persons must be searchers, and their vocation must be on the road to humanization. And as he's just read in 72, because I just experiencing and dealing with so many people in a lifetime so far, they want things, but they're not looking at the responsibility of themselves.
Right.
To be searchers of knowledge, because it will only emerge, well, as he said again, through restless, impatient continuing.
Right.
And I think that is where dialogue really finds its fruit. So I'm just bringing this out just to be fair on each end, because if you don't have that response from those who are learning, because you're going to be a student, all of us, you can be student teacher. There's nothing wrong with that title. It's about the context it's put in.
Right.
So unless you or I, who are being students, unless we're running on that platform, then we sort of feed into the idea of banking education.
Right.
It's like a person who's rioting. Well, they establish the idea of militarism or the club of law and order. So it is a responsibility on the behalf, and I think that really needs to be brought out just in general, as I observe just different things in life, the responsibility of those who searching. That's what you must want to do. Hunger and thirst. So I'll yield with that.
Okay. Anybody, yeah, thank you so much, Brother Judah, because I am, that really, that's, as we, even with the whole hungering and the whole searching, because sometimes people can say things. And as you were talking, one of the things I was kind of thinking about is how we can provoke that in people. Like if we are the kind of person who's hungering, and hopefully that we are, and we're thirsting, and we have we have this ideology, and we understand our place as teacher, student, teacher, and no matter where we go, we can end up as one or the other. Somehow, and I don't know if it's true, but I kind of think that we have the capacity to lead other people into that. If they see that, we are searching, and they see that about us, and say they have something to say, that it could be something, superficial or whatever. How we answer that, or the questions we ask them, how we get them to think, how we dialogue with them, just might get them to start that process of searching, and start that whole process of this, this process to becoming more fully human. Anyway, that was just something that just came to me as you talked about that, because I thought, well, that really could be, as even as, we saw how Yahushua taught so many times. And I brought out that I downloaded those 2 books, and I think it was like he asked like 359 questions. He was asked 183, and he answered 3. And it was, I thought that was interesting, just simply because of how much I believe that in asking questions, he wanted us to really think. He wanted us to kind of begin to search. He wanted to open us up to, to kind of to this process of inquiry, this process of becoming more fully human. And I think that we as teachers, student teachers, I think that wherever we go, understanding that about ourselves, we do have we are empowered in some ways. Now, everybody may not go, they may not go the whole way, but we certainly can, I believe we can spark in them maybe the desire, or to maybe think about researching, to cause them to hunger a little bit, to kind of want to go through this process. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they want to add. To that.
Yeah, that very well could be possible, no doubt. But either way, we realize, like you just even explained, without that, there's nothing.
Right.
And you're pretty much putting yourself in a position to be banked.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what people have to realize, their responsibility in this learning process.
Right. That's true. That's very, very true.
Really quick, now I just wanted to say, I agree with you and Elder are saying, because that takes me back to, when I was saying earlier in the beginning of this discussion, that, when we don't search, when we don't educate ourselves, we are becoming complicit to being these objects that the oppressor, or that, the ruling class, view us as, or we become these inanimate things, you know what I mean? Because we aren't doing enough research to get ourselves out of that mental state. Whereas though we're just lifeless, and we're just, no good for nothing. We don't know anything. Of course we don't know anything if we don't search and we don't study. But as we start to search and study, and, and educate ourselves, then we can have meaningful dialogue, not just, spewing out a bunch of rhetoric. So yeah, it's important that we do study, because if not, we're going along with the narrative to be docile, because we don't know, we don't even know that we're being docile, because we aren't, educating ourselves, we aren't searching. But when we start to go through that, I think that's also part of the praxis, perhaps, because we know first the self-reflection is, okay, something is wrong, that we're corrupt, that we've done something wrong. He mentioned that, that we messed up. That's a part of the self-reflection. And then, this searching, or this, finding this inquiry, that's a part of the praxis. Okay, well, what is to be done? I know Mr. Lennon asked that question. What is to be done? That's a part of the praxis. Now we have to start going through, these different, like how we do now, these Zoom meetings, these different Bible study classes, reading in our own spare time. That's all a part of the praxis, because it's an education, it's the pedagogy of the oppressed. So, you know what I mean? If we're going to educate ourselves, and we want to have conversation with other educators or other teachers, if we look at ourselves in the student position, if we're going to do that, then you gotta step your game up. You gotta come with some information. You just can't be spewing out some jargon that don't even, you know what I mean? So yeah, I very much agree with what was said, but I yield.
And that's actually a really good point, Brother Bryant, because you're right. I mean, if we go out, and I think that even in the process of, like you talked about, kind of growing in that education and that knowledge ourselves, even in terms of, say, what we're doing tonight, we are better equipped to be able to dialogue and to provoke dialogue in others, and to actually to I guess dig a little bit deeper. Say even in the course of their dialogue back and forth with us, we can actually go deeper, and that may we may be able to, I guess, connect with them on a deeper level if we have a broader understanding. We may, they may bring something up that if we didn't have any understanding of it, that might be one thing. But if we're dialoguing with that person and we do have an understanding, and they know that we understand, there's a sensitivity to it, then that creates a whole other type of a situation. So it just kind of made me think about that when you said that. I think that's so very true. That's super important. And it goes back to what Brother Judah said. It's very, very important that we understand that, that we have to be searchers. It's not just, us going out and saying certain things or understanding certain things about ourselves. We actually have to be searchers ourselves. We have to be on that journey ourselves. So that's very true.
I would like to, one more thing on that. And I believe that we also have to tell others the same thing.
Right.
Like, meaning, let them know, well, what you put in it is what you're going to get out of it.
Right.
Some people don't realize that. It's not just going to happen. They used to receiving a banking information where they don't really do nothing. Right. But I think it's important as we go out, we have to even inform them. You got to want it.
Right.
And that's what the Messiah did, exactly that.
Yeah.
Unless a man, he told them, unless you hunger
right.
and thirst after righteousness,
right.
you won't be fulfilled. Right. So I think that's very important to tell the people that you have the responsibility. You're not going to get nowhere unless you want it.
Right.
So I think that's important, because I don't know if many are aware of that.
Right. Right. And I think that goes back to, I don't know where the passage is at, but I think there's a passage where he said to count up the cost, or he gave some parable where he said nobody starts this, whatever they start, and they don't like you have to count up the cost. And it's like that is something that people need to understand. Even through dialogue and wanting to see things changed, that there's a cost that has to be paid. And you need to ask yourself, are you ready for this journey? Are you ready for what this journey is going to cost? And are you ready to put in the work to see it accomplished? So I totally agree with that. Does anybody else want to add to that? All right, I am going to move on to the next the next paragraph after the first one. But the humanist revolutionary teacher cannot wait for this possibility to materialize. From the outset, her efforts must coincide with those of the students to engage in critical thinking and the quest for mutual humanization. His efforts must be imbued with profound trust in people and their creative power. To achieve this, they must be partners of students in their relations with them. And this goes back to how the humanist teacher understands his or her place as this human to human. They do understand that they're a teacher, but I think they understand first and foremost that it's this human to human, and they're in solidarity with their students. They're not actually in this position where they're like the oppressor, like they're ruling over them. And so as a fellow learner, as considering themselves a fellow learner, they're not just only a teacher. And it's really that attitude that kind of produces this equalization in the context of community. And by doing so, it really lays the foundation for the struggle in liberation. So it's just this whole ideology of this humanist teacher in their effort in this struggle for mutual humanization. And they understand that that's what they're doing. They understand that they don't have all the answers. They understand that they're not projecting, ignorance on their students. They're not standing in a place where they have all knowledge, but they are co-laborers in a sense for this whole process of humanization. And for that, their ideology has a change where they become partners of the students. And it's a very different ideology than this ideology that of this whole teacher-student relationship that is more common that we see in the world today, that not only helps to establish these systems of injustice, but to help to maintain them. Anybody have anything to add to that before I go to the next paragraph?
Yes, ma'am, because real quick, I just like that he says but the humanist revolutionary educator. I think that's the key when we look at the educators of this society, because again, these educators are only regurgitating what they've been taught through the banking
Right.
education, which is to just serve the capitalists. But these particular educators of the pedagogy of the oppressed, these educators, they also see themselves as oppressed. They also see themselves as dehumanizers. So when
Yeah.
when their students present themselves or come as well to the table, they see themselves in their students. And their students are coming with their education, their inquiry, as we just mentioned. And then that allows them to, like he mentions, he says, excuse me, I'm sorry for that. It says the educator cannot wait for this possibility to materialize. He in other words, he can't just regurgitate information to his students and wait for them to know. He has to be a part of it. He has to be
Right.
constantly giving them thought-revoking information. So he has to constantly be encouraging their inquiry, and not just their inquiry, but encouraging dialogue. Because it's not a matter of, okay, yeah, I'm just going to put some information in you, and then I'll just wait, to see what you learn as I give you a test to see what materializes through the test. If you no, it's not like that. No, this is a constant relationship of back and forth. It's a dialogue, back and forth, back and
Absolutely.
forth. And I think that when he mentions that the humanist revolutionary educator, that's so much different than the educators of this society, because these educators aren't teaching us revolution. They aren't teaching us humanization. They're teaching us dehumanization. And they
Right.
of course they do it through the banking education system. But I mean, ultimately what they're teaching is not to, look at our reality and, believe or encourage that we can transform it. No, they're teaching us that this is the way it is, go to work and keep your mouth shut. So,
Right.
this educator that Mr. Freire is talking about is, I mean, to say different is an understatement. I mean, totally light years different. And
Right.
also you see that this educator, this particular person, whether it's male or female, they're working towards the humanization of themselves and the students.
Mhm.
So I think that that's very important as well, because it's not just the deal where, as though, again, I don't see myself as oppressed either. No, I see myself dehumanized as well. So
Mhm.
right then and there with that particular educator, when they approach a situation like that, they're fighting humanization too. That camaraderie becomes closer, because I know that's how it is sometimes, like with people in Philadelphia. If you come off a certain way, they'll be like, oh, you just a goody two shoes. Like, you ain't got no problems. Especially like young folks today, they listen, or they gravitate more to people that have knowledge, that can show them, look, I'm in the same boat as you.
Right.
Like for me, I'm driving this tow truck, paying bills. I'm trying to figure this mess out too. You know what I mean?
Right.
Although I might know a little bit something about the scriptures because I study, but it's really no different. So when you dealing with an educator that's on your level, like I get that. I get that, especially. I'm not just saying this to be saying this. I get that especially from Elder Tim and Elder Judah, because they have like that, especially like on the phone with them. They have that down to earth, like, look, this is what it is. Like, we all in this thing together. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? When you're dealing with an educator like that, it becomes, the camaraderie becomes so natural and organic, and you really feel as though that person's in the corner. But it's different compared to the educators that I had in grade school. I always felt inferior to them. Like, they knew something. They was real stern, and they didn't joke. I had a couple of teachers that joked that was like a little bit light, here and there. But no, it was never like that. It was always like they had something to tell me or something to discipline me on. That was it. You know what I mean? Whereas though, I've talked to Ella Judah numerous times on the phone, and I've presented or said something, and he'll tell me, well, consider this or look at this. I mean, the way that he presents himself, or even Elder Tim on Monday night, the way they present themselves, they give you this they I don't think they're giving you nothing. I think that they really have this feel of, look, man, I'm with you all the way with this. Like, we together, we brothers. You know what I mean? I'm your elder, but we brothers. So I think that's real important when you look at an educator, and they also see themselves in your situation. And when he mentioned that y'all both are mutual in this fight for humanization, that's important, because when you can see yourself in your teacher, or when you can see yourself in your educator, it makes you a little bit more comfortable. Well, at least for me, it does. But I yield.
Right. No, and I think that's a really good point, because I think we even see that in the relationship that the Messiah had with his disciples and with the people that he went to. I mean, there was this, I mean, obviously, I mean, I can't use it as an exact example maybe, but I'm just saying how this example that was set for us, where you saw him as their teacher, and yet he identified with where they were. He identified with their struggles. He identified with, the things that they were facing and what they were going through. And he walked through them in this whole process of what he was trying to teach them. It wasn't, even though he could have said, you guys are just, you don't have it together, you're ignorant, you this, you that. He could have said that, but he walked with them through this whole process. And I think that you're absolutely on point. I think that's exactly right. This whole quest for mutual humanization, where we see ourselves as one with the students, and that we can switch these different roles at any point. Not that it's a role, but like, we can step into these different ways of being at any point, and it just depends on what's going on at the point, at that particular, instance, at that particular moment, what we're stepping into, which, role we're fulfilling. Are we a student? Are we, a teacher at whatever time, and being open to either one. But this whole quest for mutual humanization, you're right. That's got to be I think that's fundamental to this whole process of this education of liberation between teacher and student, and kind of rethinking this whole teacher-student structure, so that you have this equalization takes place, where now we're just in this whole struggle together, and we are reaching for and fighting to become more fully human together, because we're literally in the same boat, so to speak. So I agree exactly with what you're saying. That's totally spot on. Does anybody have anything else they want to share, or anybody want to add to that?
Oh, and one more. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Elder. I'm sorry.
And forgive me on it, because it just may be a part of my own not misunderstanding, but as far as how I'm just processing it. Again, the reason why I keep bringing this part out is because in one sense, it seems like we are putting a lot of emphasis on the teachers.
Right.
And so if people, let's say people listening who may listen to this dialogue, if we don't balance it out, which we could be, I'll probably just the way I'm processing it, then it could lead into the student per se, or the person who don't have any knowledges of any sort. Then they can look on just the responsibility again of the teacher. And that's easy to do, because we may do that subconsciously. Right. It's someone else's responsibility to do this or do that. But again, like the passage we just read, but the humanist revolutionary educator cannot wait for this possibility to materialize from the outset. Her efforts must coincide with those of the students to engage in critical thinking. Because if we don't put enough emphasis, because people who may find themselves as students could put a lot of fault on the educator.
Right.
So if we don't balance it out, in which that's just, again, it just may be the way I'm processing it, because I tend to observe that just through other circles. There's a lot of emphasis on the teachers, let's say, for example, even in the educational system.
Right.
But what I'm saying also, what brings out the banking education method is the lack of critical thinking of the students. So they're really putting themselves in that place,
right,
where it's not even forced. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
The banking education thing isn't forced. So in this sense, where if the student, when you may have a teacher who's sincere, if the student don't critically think, if they're not putting themselves to diligently search, to look, to observe, like he has said in several passages, then that's where they're putting themselves. So that's why, in order for it to work harmoniously, it's important to look at the responsibility of the teacher to realize that people know things, but it's also the responsibility of the student to critically think so the harmonious process of dialogue can happen.
Right.
And I think that's important to bring them both out, really. You know, I'm not saying that we're not necessarily, but a lot of emphasis is what the teacher is doing to student. So now the student must move out from that place of it happening like that. They must critically think. So you have, I'll end with this part, you have the Messiah's disciples. They learned. Why? Because they searched.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have others who wasn't his disciples. Why? Because like Sadducees and Pharisees, he insulted them, right? He said what he said and he insulted them.
Right.
Why? Because they got to put themselves, they must together, student and teacher, teacher, student must think critically. And I think that's important, again, to realize the responsibility of the student. I lied. Let me just say this part. I notice it in the African-American communities. We talk often of the responsibility on what the government should do, what the police should do, who should do this, who should do that. Because Brian talked about, he made the correlation between leader and rulers. So, okay, we talk about the responsibility of the leader and ruler all the time. And you had mentioned it in a sense where, hey, well, we're sort of giving them all autonomy at the end of the day. But but what we rarely, seldom see is what justifies the ruling class to take certain measures in our community. Right. Because we lack we don't take our responsibility.
Right.
And you know, and now once we take responsibility and they forcibly take it, that's one thing. But as long as we're not doing our part as teacher or as student, then yes, we're going to fall into that position. So that's why, I think it's important for it to be well-rounded. Right. So we can have a harmonious dialogue. Right. Both fulfilling their roles. So right. I'll yield.
Okay. Thanks so much, Brother Judah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
I would just say I agree with everything Elder said, and that's where that A word comes in. Me and RJ always joke about that accountability. You know what I mean? Accountability, because you like if the educator already knows that we're being dehumanized. I think which is a good example. Even my testimony or the other comrades that are in this group right now. If you didn't study, then it would be no way that you would be here at the NMP. If you didn't study, you probably would leave or something like that because you haven't studied. But when you start to study and realize, yeah, the scriptures do talk about political science, and I mean, but you've done your own research, not just listening to the old classes and discussions, but you really done research. You really read the book of Isaiah, you know what I mean, inside and out, or you try your best to, right? You really read Amos, Job, you read these books, because you've done your own inquiry, your own research. Then you can have a dialogue, in the class or in the signal chat and stuff like that. So, you know what I mean? It's that accountability, because without that search and without that thirst or that hunger for knowledge, then you won't, like he's saying about the educators, you won't be able to participate. The key word is in the mutual humanization, right. Because you won't, like, you'll feel as though that is nothing wrong with the society. You'll have right. that mentality that, oh, this is just the way it is. But to the individuals that know there's something wrong, they go do their research, then they can align themselves up with educators or revolutionary educators to say, we need to get rid of dehumanization, come back to humanity. But you can't have that mutualness if you don't have any knowledge, if you haven't done any research. Because right. if not, you'll be, like Elder just mentioned, you'll still be looking for that banking. You'll be waiting for the leader or the educator to say what we're going to do next, instead of saying, okay, look, y'all, I got an idea, or I've been researching and thinking. We see comrades do that all the time, at least in our group. Let's try this, like Sister Shana or whoever, Brother RJ, Comrade Ock, Brother Nashawn. We see comrades come up with ideas all the time, especially Comrade Kevin, bringing different articles. So it's about that inquiry. And I mean, I'm using these names to show like examples of how what Elder Judah is saying. I've witnessed it, but that all took accountability. That comrade, sister, brother, whoever, they've heard the call, they've heard the message from the school, and then they start to do their practice. They start to research and investigate. And I think not too long ago we had like a diagram, a chart of how all the different companies, the monopolies, how they were all interconnected and stuff like that is, through research, through studying, and that blessed everybody. Everybody started to see how, how this thing is really working. It's all interconnected, interwoven. And I'm using that as an example just to say that it's so true what you're bringing out, Elder Judah and Elder Sister Kaya, is that inquiry, that search, it must be done, because if not, this praxis or this liberation, it won't be mutual. It'll be the same way that it is right now. It'll be teacher, student, or leader and flock. And I mean, I know the scripture talks about a kingdom of priests, and we went over that before when we were talking about the Kohen, and the priest meaning scientists almost. So it's like this kingdom of educators, these scientific men and women that understand. You know what I mean? But it's not just it's not just it's not hierarchy anymore. But that only happens, you only can be in those ranks if you do what the book of Timothy say, to study to show yourself approved. If you aren't studied, then you aren't learned. You know what I mean? And then you don't have nothing to say because you don't have no education. So it definitely does deal with accountability, and that accountability goes into your diligence, to be intentional to every day, be on your study horse. You know what I mean? But I yield. I don't want to be on a rant. I yield.
No, you're fine. Super, super important. Anybody else have anything to add to that? And then I guess I just wanted, the last thing that I kind of wanted to add is I was thinking too about Brother Judah was saying about Judah have this, well-rounded situation. And I think it seems like that maybe one of the reasons why well, I don't know, maybe it's just me, what the teacher is mentioned so much is because maybe the teacher, the teacher, it seems almost, and maybe I'm wrong on this one, but it would seem like that the way that he's kind of talking about the teacher, that they kind of lead in this process, not in the banking way, but they kind of lead in this process as this facilitator or initiator of this whole mutual quest for humanization. And it seems like he starts with the teacher leading in that process, but then this is a process that just simply it flows into something very different. Like, the teacher may start in that process because they kind of create that environment, but in the context of that environment, now you have this whole flow of ideas and knowledge. And as you have this flow of ideas and knowledge and this reflection and this inquiry and these asking questions, this is something that begins to take place on a different level between the so-called teacher and students. It's no longer just the teacher or the students, it's the students and the teachers and the teachers and the students. And there's this whole quest in a mutual way for humanization, like becoming more fully human. And I wonder sometimes if that's why, because like even, as it kind of talks about in these passages talking about the teacher, but it seems like that maybe it's because the teacher kind of leads in the initiation of that. And the teacher's understanding that the teacher's not coming into that situation as a teacher or as somebody who is a ruler or exacting ignorance on somebody else, but is actually coming in that with the objective or the end result of this being something that is very much mutual and equal between themselves and between the students or the individuals that they're facilitating this critical thought among. So I don't know if that even makes sense what I'm saying, but I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I do. And I agree. I agree as far as the written context. Or the written text. That's what he's
right,
because the teacher is the initiator.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. As on our end, as we're dialoguing on it, and as people may listen to learn, then we have to bring out, because he's still making them same points.
Right.
On this accountability of the student, and not even just a studier per se. I do want to make a differentiation between studying and critical thinking. They eventually come into harmony.
Right.
But sometimes it takes critical thinking before you can enter into study.
Right.
Because that's when you analyze, oh, okay, I need to learn more about this, or learn more about that. So yeah, I agree definitely with what you're saying. I think that's our responsibility, because he probably didn't cover it all, because it'd be voluminous, the text itself, but he's bringing it in as like this undertone of an understanding where this student-teacher relationship, yes, the teacher must do this and do that, but it seems like this undertone he's saying is the student who's critically thinking themselves may be shut down. And that's what he's explaining. So we got to bring out that the student is not just the teacher, but his undertone as well. This student must be a critical thinker. They must want to know. And that's it. Without that, you cannot, it will be impossible to have dialogue.
I agree. I agree
on each end. So I think that's, it's important for other listeners who may listen to us to know that.
Right.
You know, to you know, so they able to carry on dialogue.
Right. Right. Thanks, Brother Judah.
Hey, shalom, y'all.
Shalom.
Yeah, I've been listening to this dialogue, and it's a good dialogue. And I just, as y'all were talking, I was just seeing examples of real time how this teacher-student relationship has been effective in my life, and how it's very important between both. Because like Brother Judah just said, like the student must want to know it. Now, wanting to know it and acquiring the knowledge is, well, I won't say they're two different things, but they're things. Because you can be looking at something one way, then a teacher comes and just gives you an alternative view. Well, try looking at it this way. Then when you look at it that way, you may bring something or see something that the teacher didn't see. Then now that creates a whole new dialogue between the two, to where both are starting to really fire off on each other. And as far as learning is involved. And so in this dialogue, I was just sitting back listening, and I was like, I have a point of reference on that, because there's a lot of things that I was looking at differently years ago, but now I'm looking at, like, I'm doing this Daniel study on Nebuchadnezzar, and I've never really looked at it like I'm seeing it now, but I'm only seeing it now because of the dialogue I've had with my teachers and fellow students in the school. And now it's like, it's like some type of, like, I don't know. It's just, I'm seeing a whole new thing. So I just wanted to bring that up.
You know, you just said something, because I want to say on this end too, as far as me being a so-called teacher, and I guess this is the other end where it, like, I like to listen to, for example, I don't know what tomorrow hold, but I know today, up until today, like when she's, well, you know, I don't want to exhaust it, I don't want to say this and say that. No, because I like to hear it. And I think these are the differences, where a dialogue with a person who, just like I could just think of things that he said in some of the teachings and his replies, like, oh, snaps, I didn't think of that scripture. Or Sister Kaya herself, you know, bringing stuff out, namely what might probably come to my mind, our dialogue, and she mentioned this life of trees or whatever it may be, that brings information back to help understand more scripture. And that's what I mean at harmony. But then I can also think of others who've been a part of the school who didn't critically think, but they had something to say. And since they didn't critically think, and they probably ran on a platform of whatever, Eric, I don't know what it was, but it led in, it was just this, it's just terrible or unpleasant conversation. If is there any at all, you know what I mean? Because it's like they're really not critically thinking, but they got something to say. And you know, now they may be on the other end where they're trying to deposit information, not knowing it's a contradiction, because they're not critically thinking. And that's why just those examples, we're being around people who are searching, who are dialoguing and open. This is what I have found. What do you think about this? Opposed to dealing with others who they're really not critically thinking, and you know what? It's just a real, almost a stale discourse between the two, you know, pretty much leading to, you know, it's just unpleasant conversations. And that's I guess that's part of the deal. I bringing that out made me think, made me want to express that even more. So
And,
I'll
and,
yield.
um, and also, like, I look at it like we're all adults here. Everybody's an adult. And so in being an adult, like, it's not like when you were in school and the teacher becomes this iconic figure that you look to in all things.
Right.
Not saying that we don't hold our teachers in high regard, because we do. I know I do. But just we're adults here. So it's time we're sharing now. And we're learning how to critically analyze, critically assess, critically think. And now we take that portion that we get and we apply it to our own studies when we're alone. And when we bring it back, like I said before, we may bring out some things that weren't looked at by the quote unquote teacher. You know what I mean? And so that's the growth in Hamashiach, that we're all in this together. And like I said, we hold the teachers in high regard. That's why I hate to miss a class, because I feel like I'm missing something that's going to add to my learning, that's getting me where I'm trying to go. And so, like, we're all adults. We're all adults here. And so it's up to each of us. If we want it, it's there to get. And it can be to the point that we all lean on each other and how to get it. Look, we sitting here, Sister Kaya, Sister Brian, all of us Brother Brian, sorry, bro. Sorry, bro. All of us are on right now, but we're just throwing stuff against each other. And we're seeing what do you think about this? What do you think about it? Now that's growth. And the ones who aren't as talkative as much, like I wasn't talkative early in the class. I'm just sitting there listening and trying to put together what's being brought out. And that's that growth, that's that learning, and that's that fire. You know what I mean? And so I'll yield right there.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And as you were talking about that, and even as Brother Judah was talking, I was actually thinking about how he was saying people who, they, in terms of their critical thinking, and they're not critical thinking. But I guess the question that I would have, Brother Judah, is I wonder sometimes through our dialogue with people, because I would think that, and this might be a stretch, but I actually think that there might be a little bit of truth to it, that the average American probably does not think critically, or doesn't think very critically. And so it does make me wonder if through our interaction with them, with some, not everybody, but with some, in having a conversation and we realize that they don't, is there a situation where we might be able to draw them into this process of beginning to think critically?
Yeah, I believe so. According to the Messiah, if they want to search,
right,
that's the key.
So they have to already have the heart to do it.
Yes, they got to really want to know, and I think that's the genesis for all of us.
Right.
We just want we knew some things, but we wasn't sure where it was. So we need to talk this out. What is valid? What isn't?
Right.
But we wanted to know, and I think that's the genesis.
Right.
That's the foundations. And I will say this, because I was having a dialogue with an individual on my job today, and it really wasn't a dialogue per se. The information they're bringing, I've seen a lot of contradictions, right? But they're not having a dialogue. They're just saying the way it is, and whatever subject come up, they want to talk about this subject, that subject. They really wasn't critically thinking.
Right.
Opposed to then, but people on a who's listening, who may be quiet, they may ask a question. Now that's a critical thinking.
Right.
Because this person, you may say something, they just stop long enough to have you talk and don't even really understand your question because they still here trying to reply. So you just run into just different people where, case in point, they are trying to bank information into us, and it's full of contradictions. Right. And they really wasn't ready to critically think about their own position.
Right.
to like, okay, well, let me at least hear this out just so I can re-examine what I have learned already.
Right.
It's just very interesting. Just going through those experiences with just different people. But yeah, I believe so. Going back to what you said, I believe that is true. And but whether I'm right or wrong, I definitely believe it starts with that person wanting to know.
Mm-hmm.
I'll yield.
Can I say one more thing?
No, yeah, go for it.
Now see, with Brother Judah bringing that out, it made me think of something else that I've been observing here recently, but I haven't even spoke on. Like we spoke about earlier about, grade school and your dependency on the teacher, all the way up through to your college, if you went to college whatsoever, any religious facet that you found yourself in, whether it been a Baptist church, any type of Christian church. But now I'm seeing and I'm paying attention to the same thing, even in the so-called quote unquote Hebrew community. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to any community. I'm not. I'm really not. But I'm just saying what I see. And what I'm seeing is you can go into an assembly, even in the Hebrew community. You can go into an assembly and you can figure out and find out who the teachers are, because you will see them. It takes probably 2 to 3 Sabbath classes to see who the teachers are.
Right.
You can go back 5 years later and it's still those same teachers and those same individuals in the audience looking. Where is the growth?
I agree.
Where's the dialogue? Where no one's asking questions.
Yeah.
No one dares bring up a conversation to where y'all have to go back and forth, especially during the sermon.
Right.
And so there's something's missing there, which would be the involvement of the student and teacher relationship, to where people are iron is sharpening iron, where you're growing off of it. No, we're in the setting still. I mean, and that's very seductive, because this is how we've grown or thought we were supposed to learn. You sit down, you be quiet, you shut your mouth, you listen to the teacher. I mean, what's that? Ecclesiastes 12 say, keep thy foot when I go into the house of God. Yeah, I get that. I get that there is a point in time where that is effective. But when you look at Hamashiach, he asked the students questions, they asked him questions. Mm-hmm. He told them to look at this. What do you think about that? He created this dialogue to where learning it couldn't help but to be fundamental.
Right.
To where they began to learn, because it's real time. We're seeing this, and he's putting it into play, putting it into practice. Like right now, what's going on with the NMP, where we're now starting to bring out lessons and stuff. It's a scary thing, but it's necessary.
Right.
Because we have to be able to stand on what we say we believe, and standing on it, you have to know it.
Absolutely.
And knowing it, you have to study it.
Right.
And studying it, you got to want it. Right. So, so I yield on that.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome point. That's so very true. And I'm, so thankful. I'm sure that, with even what everything, I'm just thankful for just the opportunity to be able to have the dialogue, because you are right in saying that. And that's something that is really important to me. Like when to be able to go out, to be able to talk to people, not to just know what I believe, but to be able to say why I believe what I believe, and to really kind of, be able to think critically and back it up with evidence and say, this is, give an answer for what I believe, basically like what the scripture says. So I think that's just that's super important. That's super, super important. So I hear exactly what you're saying. Anybody else want to add to that? So let's see, it's 10:36. So I'm going to go ahead and start the next paragraph here. Let's see, I think I'm on paragraph 3 here, and we're still on page 75 of the 50th anniversary edition. And I think it's 49 or 48 of the other one. Is it 48, 49, Brother Bryant? I think it's 40, it's either 48 or 49. Okay.
I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute my mic. Yeah, no,
Oh,
it's pages 49.
okay, thank you. All right. So I think we're here, right here where it says the banking concept does not admit to such partnership. So we're going back into that the whole idea of this partnership in this mutual humanization, this partnership between teacher and student of this struggle. And they basically have the same struggle, you know, and it goes back to what Brother Bryant said about, you know, they're in the same boat, but the teacher sees himself or herself as in solidarity with the students. They have the same struggle and they're going through the same process. They both want to, there's this process of both wanting to be more fully human. But it says here, the banking concept does not admit to such partnership, and necessarily so. To resolve the teacher-student contradiction, to exchange the role of depositor, prescriber, domesticator for the role of student among students would be to undermine the power of the oppressor and to serve the cause of liberation. So let me read that again. The banking concept does not admit to such partnership, and necessarily so. To resolve the teacher-student contradiction, to change the role of depositor, prescriber, domesticator, which is the teacher, for the role of student among students would be to undermine the power of oppression and serve the cause of liberation. And so one of the notes that I wrote down here is the banking concept of education creates the human condition of alienation and oppression through dehumanization. And, you know, as long as there's this contradiction between the two, and there is not this effort for mutual humanization, there's going to be alienation between the two. It doesn't breed relationship. It doesn't breed equality. It doesn't breed a commonness in the struggle between teacher and student that they're both fighting for. They're both wanting to get to the same objective, which is to become more fully human. Here I put the banking concept of education creates the human condition of alienation and oppression through dehumanization. By virtue of what it is, it cannot create partnership or relationship based on true humanity between the teacher and the student, because justice, humanization, and equality is not its objective. It's important to know this, because as we go into our communities and whatever we're doing in the world, you know, whether it's in our home, whether it's among the community, we're talking to people and they're getting to know what we believe, and we're having different conversations and different dialogues with people. Wherever we go, it's really important to understand that in wherever we are, and this is what I wrote, that the teachers, that we realize that wherever we go, that we switch back and forth between teacher and student, and there should be this willingness and expectation. And I think when we operate like that with people, it really opens the door for the student to come into solidarity with the teacher and the teacher with the student. And I think what I'm trying to say is it kind of goes into what Paul talked about somewhere. I can't remember in which book he talks about it, but he talks about how not only be preoccupied with your own interests, but also think about the interests of other people. And when we open ourselves up to dialogue with other people in a way that brings their world in, and we can share our world, they can share their world there, and there's this mutual situation going on, this back and flow of ideas, this dialogue between, then it does create the situation where there's more of an opportunity, I believe, for us to establish this common knowledge and this commonality in the struggle that we're struggling for, which is to become more fully human. Anybody have anything that they want to add to that? So the next paragraph says, implicit in the banking concept is the assumption of the dichotomy between human beings and the world. A person is merely in the world, not with the world or with others. The individual is spectator, not recreator. In this view, the person is not a conscious being, corpo consciente. He or she is rather a possessor of a consciousness, an empty mind, passively open to the reception of deposits of reality from the world outside. For example, my desk, my books, my coffee cup, all the objects before me as bits of the world which surround me would be inside me exactly as I am inside my study right now, This view makes no distinction between being accessible to consciousness and entering consciousness. The distinction, however, is essential. The objects which surround me are simply accessible to my consciousness, not located within it. I am aware of them, but they are not inside me. And so this is kind of where I started to think about, I'm going to read some of the notes, but this is kind of where I started to kind of think about the difference between what Freire is bringing out as man as a possessor of consciousness or a domesticated being, rather than a conscious being. So what I wrote here, and then I'm going to go into some of the passages I thought about and how I kind of connected them with what we're talking about tonight. As a possessor of a consciousness or a domesticated being, he merely exists in the world as it is, as he is, with little capacity to understand or intervene in it or to transform it. So, but yet according to Genesis, this is not how the Most High created mankind to exist in the world. And Brother Brian, you exactly said this at the very beginning. This was literally one of the things you just said. This understanding is fundamental to our struggle to becoming fully human and empower others in the struggle for the same purpose. Man was not created as the possessor of a consciousness. He was created as a conscious being, as a self-aware being with the ability to know himself, to understand through critical awareness how he is in the world, and with each other. And I think that, you know, one of the things that Freire is actually bringing out, that we are just not, as human beings, we're not just possessors of consciousness. Like, we don't just get all of our stimulus from, you know, the outside or from the world around us. We actually are a conscious being, meaning we exist not just in the world, we exist with the world. And when I think about how we exist with the world, if I'm with somebody, you know, if we are with each other in the struggle, it means that we operate together, but then there's also this capacity to stand apart from. There's this capacity to look at in a way that is objective, where that we might not be able to do that if we just existed in the world and not with the world. And I think that this is one of the things that I believe is one of the main things that separates man from the animals. Man was created with the capacity for knowledge to intervene in and transform his world, because he was given the power, unlike animals, to stand apart from the thing out of which he was created. And because he has the power to stand apart from it, to understand it as it is, and to become master of it, he can intervene in it or rule over it. And I think that when I think about this particular paragraph, to me, that's really kind of the big idea of this paragraph. And it's really just a concept that I think plays out over and over and over again. And then one of the things that before I move on, did anybody want to say anything about that? Okay. So one of the things that I thought about Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And I'm going to read this in two versions. I'm going to read this in the New Jerusalem Bible. And I actually bought this Bible for one passage alone, and it was how it defined people being Abraham's children being blessed. I don't know. I love the way it worded it, and so I decided to get it. But I'm going to read Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 in both of these, because I want to kind of bring out something about what I believe, you know, Freire is bringing out here, because I do believe that this capacity that we have for being human, this way of being that the Most High has bestowed upon us, where we have the ability to inquire, we have the ability to search, we have the ability to observe, to draw conclusions, we have the ability to research, to stand outside of a situation and look at it and determine how we're going to act within that situation, and to make decisions and then act upon it to transform it. And so mankind is, you know, apart from, you know, of course, the Most High, but I'm just talking about things in the created order that mankind has been given power over. Mankind is the only one who has the capacity to stand apart from something and to consider it, to intervene in it. And whereas the animals, they exist in that, but they're more subject to what as a being, just as a thing with a consciousness, but not necessarily a conscious being, or a being that is actually aware. So Romans 12, 1 and 2 says in the New Jerusalem, it says, think of God's mercy, my brothers, and worship him. I beg you in a way that is worthy of thinking beings, by offering your living bodies in a holy sacrifice, truly pleasing to God. Do not model yourselves on the behavior of the world around you, but let your behavior change, modeled by your new mind. This is the only way to discover the will of God and to know what is good. And to know what is good, what it is that God wants, what is the perfect thing to do. And then the Brit Hadashah, this is the interlinear Hebrew New Testament. This one says, it says, accordingly, I implore you, brothers, through the tender compassions of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and most satisfying to God, which is your reasonable ritual of ministry. And do not be conformed to this present age, but rather be metamorphosed by the renewing of your mind, in order that you might examine and verify what is the beneficial, good, most satisfying, and complete will of God. And I thought about those because I feel like that, as you know, Freire is kind of bringing these things out. When we think about this idea that the way this world is right now, the way that the oppressor has kind of set up this banking concept of education, this process that man goes through that kind of anesthetizes his thinking, it dumbs him down. It, you know, they're not encouraged to think critically. In fact, that's discouraged. They want to somehow shape the consciousness of the man to fit the environment that they've actually created, so that he's kind of a partner in it and he helps to maintain it. And so when I think about the book of Romans, I feel like that this is something that the apostle is that he's bringing out, kind of what Freire talks about as he's kind of talking about the power that human beings have to actually change their situation. They kind of have to be brought into it through inquiry, through critical thinking, through dialogue, but they have the power to change their world, to intervene in it, and to transform it. And so when Paul talks about in Romans chapter 12, and I guess I'm going to focus more on 2, where he says, don't be conformed. And this is more of a situation, that word actually means with, by association, through companionship, process, resemblance, possession, likeness, and composition, with the implication of completeness. It is a preposition denoting unity. So it kind of goes back to last week. I think I had mentioned something about a lot of this stuff that that Freire is bringing out, and that as we are growing, it's a way that we're supposed to grow in a collective. Yeah, we do it as individuals, but it is a collective. And I think as we get around critical thinkers, and you know, like we're doing tonight, and we're kind of having this dialogue, it is something that causes us to grow in this context of collectivity. It's like this collective things that is happening between us. And so the other definition of that is it is a preposition denoting union, to conform one's mind and character to another's pattern, to fashion oneself according to conform to the same pattern. This is accomplished collectively and maintained that way. And it's no wonder that the powers that be, they push individuality as a way of existing in the world, but then they maintain control over the masses of people because they understand the power of collectivity. And I think this is actually one of the struggles that makes it so hard when we're talking about this struggle to become more fully human. And even looking at ancient Israel, when we look at ancient Israel, the average individual his identity or her identity was not based on this individual idea that we have today, like, oh, who are you, kind of, looking inside yourself, your truth, this kind of thing. It wasn't so much like that. The identity individual was not based on the individual. It didn't originate from the individual. It was more based on the collective, so that the individual did not determine his identity based on, this individualistic perception. Instead, his identity was determined by the whole collective, which is why if somebody broke certain aspects of the law, he or she would be cut off from his people, because it was almost like, this is who these people are, and your identity doesn't fit with it. So this is more of a whole collective situation when he's saying, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I feel like that this idea that we can be transformed by the renewing of our mind, that even though this world system is the way that it is, even though the oppressor has set the things up the way that he has set these things up, we have the capacity in this process of becoming fully human, to not be conformed to it, but to be transformed in opposition to it. The Most High has given us that capacity. And I think that, even as we're reading this whole thing with Friere, that's something that he's really bringing out, that is really kind of how I see it, is that man has been given the power to assess his conditions. And even if he's oppressed in his conditions, there is this capacity for him to assess his conditions, to stand apart from his conditions. And it's really only in that way, as he begins that process of what is exclusively human, as he begins that process, that he actually has the opportunity, or I would say the real potential, to be able to intervene in a situation and to be able to transform it. But I believe that's more of like this whole collective situation going on, and not just, it starts with the individual, but I believe that it is something that has to happen in all of us. It's not just, one person or another person. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that?
I would like to say something. What you just said is excellent. Just even from the comparison with Israel being cut off, this idea of collectivity. Yeah, that is very, very good information. I definitely appreciate you bringing that out. It was something else you said too. I think I want to respond to is, we said it several times, is the ability. I mean, departing from what Friere was talking about, fatalism, where we felt that we can't do anything. It's God's will. We're trapped here,
Right.
But you're breaking this mode of we can't do it, but we can. And like
Right.
this power. And I believe that's what the apostles were talking about, or the Messiah was talking about. As the people come together collectively, he will send the spirit of truth, and it will lead and guide us to all truth, which has to do with this transformation of the mind. And this also, he said, anything we ask in his name,
Right.
he will give it. And so when you're looking at what Friere argues here in this passage, I believe you read it. I stepped away briefly, but I believe it was in this paragraph. For the role of the student, this is page 75, probably the second to last paragraph, the last sentence. For the role of student among students would be to undermine the power of oppression and serve the cause of liberation.
Right.
And I think I think that's one of the goals of this ministry, is because we have been taught we cannot, and now, like, wait a minute, the power that rests with those coming together in the name of the Creator, we literally can change the world. And I think, I just want to bring that out because you was saying that and hinting towards that. And it's just a good reminder for us all, and for people who, God willing, will be listening to this on the replay. So I think that we can do it, and it's to, be mindful of that and have faith in that. I'll yield.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I was, even with that, is we could see that from Genesis. I mean, from Genesis, sometimes I think it's like, okay, all the animals came and Adam named all the animals, but I think in kind of thinking about that, it really made me think about the process that it must have taken. Did he have to think about their characteristic? Different aspects of not just name the animal, but there had to be a thought process that came along with, or went along with, the name that he came to. However that looked, it would seem that he would have had to come through, there would have had to be this process that he would have had to go through. So even, I think even in that we see, from the beginning, I think there are a lot of examples that we can see where the Most High created mankind as this thinking being, as this self-aware, being who is able to intervene in his world, because that's really the only way that he can rule over it. Like, how else could he subdue it? How else could he rule over it if he did not have the capacity to, you know, to collectively stand apart from it and make certain types of assessments and come to certain kind of knowledges? It would seem that way anyway. So I was just kind of thinking about that today as I was thinking about this, how we can really see that from the beginning. And it really is it is a quality or a characteristic of, I believe, the sons of God. And I believe that that goes back to why Adam was called that, because, you know, when we think about Romans, where it talks about how the world is, you know, groaning, creation, waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God, because this whole idea of becoming fully human, that's who the sons of God are. Like these people who go through this process, we go through this process to become fully human, but that's the way that the sons of God were created to exist, in that state of being fully human, and all that you know, all that comes with that process. So anyway, that was just another thought that I had.
Nice, I agree. And you just mentioned something again. Are you reading from, because it's the same wording in the Jerusalem 1966. You're reading from the Jerusalem or the New Jerusalem?
The Jerusalem. It's the 1966 one.
Oh, okay, 1966. Okay, because it's a different. The New Jerusalem is different, but I never really looked through that one. But
Okay.
that's what actually the one you're reading tonight is actually one I'm looking through now.
Okay.
And again, so I see the wording in which you was bringing out, where you say, "I beg you in a way that is worthy of thinking being."
Right. That's
Yeah,
exactly what I meant to bring out.
Yep.
Right.
I yield.
Anybody want to the other thing that I wanted to bring out from that is, like, when you as we look down and it talks about not modeling yourself after the behavior of this world, but change your behavior modeled by your new mind. And this is the only way to discover the will of God and to know what is good, and what it is that God wants, what is the perfect thing to do. So it's like there's a lot of these like key words: discover, new mind, changing your behavior modeled by your new mind. And you see this thinking being, but you keep seeing these words that are indicative of a conscious being, something, a being that is required to go through a critical thought process to become something else or to accomplish something else. It's not just that it can be accomplished. We literally have to forge this path through, becoming critically aware and praxis and reflection, and becoming critically aware and praxis and reflection, and kind of doing this whole thing over and over and over again. It's just this whole process of becoming. But it, at the root of it all, is this idea that mankind is a conscious being who can operate in a state of critical consciousness to intervene in his world.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yep. Excellent point. And that wording, like you said, in this Jerusalem Bible definitely supports that. That's I appreciate that. That's real good. I'll yield.
Anybody else have anything to add? Brother Brian, Brother Ak. And I know Brother Ak, I know Ak is brother. I was telling Brother Judah that when I was at the thing, I woke up, I don't know which week it was. I don't even remember which week. I think it was the first week. And I was like, oh, Brother Ak. And I woke up the next morning, I was like, you call him Brother Ak.
Right, I'm used to it.
I know that's what it is. I just, I wanted you to know I do know that. That's Ak.
Right. So when this said, I already know. It's all good.
Right. So,
no, I don't have nothing else.
Okay. Brother Brian.
Not at the moment. No, man. I was actually writing down some of the things that you were saying. Not at the moment. No, man.
Okay. It's 11:01. So if nobody else has anything to say or to add, the starting place next Thursday will be page 76 in the 50th anniversary edition, and then it will be, I think, in the other one,
It's gonna be
48.
it should be page 49, because earlier when you asked me, I made a mistake. I meant to say page 48 when you started reading the banking concept does not admit to partnership. That was page 48. So
Okay.
next week you have the paperback copy. That's going to be page 49. And you said in the anniversary edition is page 76. So what I'm doing right now is I'm putting like a little asterisk at the top of the book.
Okay.
That lets me know that the anniversary, which one is which. That's all. But yeah, it's going to be page 49. I think I
Okay.
have the same book that I have. So in our book, it's going to be 49. I got you.
Okay.
Yeah, I got the same book, 49.
Okay. So next week, Brother Brian is going to be taking over, and he is going to close this out because I'll probably be on, but like I'll be back at work. So I will be, just kind of giving my input or making comments or whatever, but Brother Bryant will be the main reader who is actually kind of wrapping this thing up and bringing it to a close. Probably next week, maybe not, but more than likely, because we are just like a page and a half out. So yeah, so that's the end of that. So if nobody has anything else to say, Brother Judah, Brother Brian, or
Hey, I got something to say. You did great on your read. I hope I do half as good when my turn comes, and I thank you.
I have thoroughly, thank you so much, but I have thoroughly enjoyed. So I mean, I've learned so much, and this is really it's just a wonderful opportunity to be able to kind of dialogue like this, to be able to dialogue back and forth, because it really kind of helps to learn, bumping your thoughts off, other people, hearing what other people have to say and how they're thinking about it. It really does. And then you kind of reassess what you thought and maybe tweak or change what you thought a little bit. And I just think that's how we grow as the people of the Most High. That's how we become, this mission that we have, to be, to struggle for the fullness of humanity, or be like the priests, kind of like leading other people and stuff, how we teach. I think that this process, this is how this process takes place in us, and I really don't think it could take place any other way. I think this is how it has to take place. I think this is of necessity that it takes place this way in us, because otherwise we don't come to this common knowledge. I think we still might have little differences or whatever, but we kind of, the more we dialogue, the more we come to this common knowledge of the things that are right and good and just, as we kind of go back and forth and we dialogue about these things. So I'm super appreciative, just, of everything. So I want to say thank you, Brother Judah and Brother Brian, and, I just thank you guys for, and everybody for, just the opportunity.
Oh, I agree 100%. I think it's helpful for all of us, and yeah, I definitely appreciate the participation. So yeah, I'm enjoying it myself, and I believe this is the process. This is what it takes for us to become equipped to do the will of the Almighty.
Right.
So yep, I'll yield with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna take Akro and I say that God willing, next week I do half as good as you, sister, because you did an excellent job. It was a pleasure, studying and going over some notes with you, and just because I know when me and you talked on the phone, you were telling me about the nervousness and stuff like that, but when you get on stage and you come and you present, I mean, it's like effortless. And I mean, that's like one side of it. But I really appreciate the amount of scriptures and how you tie in the Almighty's word to it, and you make it. Because, to me, when you tie in the scriptures to life, sometimes I have a hard time doing that. But when you're able to do that, to me, I feel as though you can bring the scripture, to real time. That kind of like makes the scripture. I know it's practical, whether I can do it or not. I know it's practical, the Bible. But that right there is like real, helpful for me, because it makes me see different things. I'm not too skilled with being able to correlate the scriptures all the times with the revolutionary writers. So that's why I always appreciate when Elder Judah does his teaching, and Akish is good at that too, along with the other comrades too. I'm just mentioning Akish because he came to my mind first. But I we all do that. I'm not really, that's not my strongest suit, being able to tie it all together sometimes. But I really appreciate through your presentation for the last 2-3 weeks, you kept bringing up scripture and being able to tie Mr. Freiri's writings to the scriptures. RJ did the same as well on his presentation. But I say all I have to say is that yeah, through the grace of God, God willing, my presentation as in closing out chapter 2, it'd be half of what yours was, because you did an excellent job, and I just appreciate everything you brought to the table. The last discussions, I mean, I got so much meat from all of them. Even taking notes this evening, and just meditating on the things that you say allows me to bring out what's it called, my recap and everything else that I want to convey to the audience, for next week. And as I did this week, the week before last, the things that you brought out, I was able to make and build my recap off of that. So a lot of things that you said, using Mr. Freire writings, and a lot of things from your own education or from your own inquiries, should I say, we was learning about tonight, your own research was really beneficial, and it helped me a lot. And I just appreciate you so much, Elder Sister Kaya. And with that, I yield. But before we go off, if nobody has anything else to say, I was going to read this scripture from Colossians chapter 3. I'm only going to read a couple verses. And I think it's kind of befitting for this teacher-student narrative. But I'm going to read Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 to 17. And then I'll close out the recording. But it reads, put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long suffering, forbearing one another, and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. And above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also ye are called in one body, and be ye thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. And whatsoever ye do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. And I just wanted to read that to close out. And I'll say shalom to you all. And let me just stop this recording.